Hey everyone, welcome to the first video that I have ever recorded for my blog. Super excited about this, should be fun. I want to do more of these because I personally feel like it's funner to listen to something and easier than it is to read it, at least when you're busy and don't really have the time to sit down and read a full blog post. Without further ado, I will tell you what we're talking about, which is recycling. And more specifically, why it's important to reduce our plastic consumption and not just bank on the fact that, well, we're recycling it, so it's fine. Because I got a question the other day on my Instagram that asked, why is it important that we reduce this plastic consumption if we can recycle it? And I felt like that was such a really good and valid question, and something that probably a lot of people wonder. Why is everyone talking about reducing our plastic consumption when I can just recycle it and that's just as good, right? Well, this kind of, for me, highlighted some of the misconceptions around this whole recycling process. Let's get to it and answer the question. So there's really two predominant points and predominant reasons, in my opinion, that we need to consider definitely reducing our plastic consumption before we just rely on recycling to kind of save the day. Because as you will see, there are lots of flaws in this system. It's a great thing and it certainly serves a huge purpose and needs to happen and will continue to happen, but there have been some tremendous changes over the past few years that will certainly affect how you engage with recycling. Not just because you want to, but because we have to. So without further ado, let's get to my 2 points. The first point I want to make is that you do not know, especially today in the state that things are in, if something is going to be recycled or not. Now, let's dive into this a little more. China has been taking all of and many of the other countries in the world are recycling the vast majority of our recycling for the past 25 years. So there's a huge misconception of how recycling works. I think a lot of people think that they put it in the recycling bin, and I used to think this as well. You put it in the recycling bin, and then it goes somewhere here close, in the States at least somewhere, and gets turned into another water bottle or another Coke can or something like that. But that's really not the reality of how recycling works. So how recycling actually works, or at least has for the past 25 years, is that once you throw something into the recycling bin, you are essentially saying, hey, I know this has some value and I don't want it, but I want to have the peace of mind that it is going to create something else and not just going directly to landfill. And that's a great thing. So you give these things up for free. The recycling, they've got recycling trucks, which typically look a lot prettier than the garbage trucks, but similar, come by, pick these things up, those trucks, then take the recycling to a sorting facility that's most likely near where you live. These things are then sorted either by machine or by hand, and they are then put into huge bales, okay, huge bales. Those are then hypothetically used to be sold to China, which then can use these essentially raw materials to create new things like toys and clothes and those kind of things that we know China to create a ton of. So that is historically how things have worked for the past 25 years. And this is how the US takes care of its recycling, and essentially a huge chunk of its unwanted items that we would otherwise send to landfill. So really, the United States doesn't recycle its own things. It sells it to China, who then utilizes it to make other products. Make sense? Unfortunately, while this is all fine and dandy, this was a system that was working out for everyone. Unfortunately, China said, hey, rest of the world, I don't want to take your trash anymore. Sorry. So the US, our market for recycling here in the late 2017, that's when China announced this new policy change, it got halted because the United States is not set up with the right facilities, the right infrastructure to recycle its own materials. And we got a lot of recycling. And what are we gonna do with it now? There's no longer a market for it because China's not buying it. So China is no longer accepting glass, most plastics, and most paper, like magazines, office paper, junk mail. So that's a lot of items that in recycling that China is no longer accepting. And the stuff that they do accept now, they now have really strict policy in place that it can only be 1% to 0.5 to 1% impure, because we were slipping in a lot of our trash and a lot of contamination with the recycling that we were sending to China. And they kind of got tired of it, because honestly, Americans are really bad at recycling. We don't really know what we're doing. We're wish cycling a lot. Like, oh, this probably can be recycled. This probably can be. So we're just honestly throwing things in the recycling, hoping that it's going to be recycled and ultimately making ourselves feel better. I am so guilty of this, but certainly recently, and especially after doing a little bit of research for this, I've realized, oh, it really does nobody any favors and honestly causes a lot more harm and no good when we throw things in the recycling that shouldn't be there. So China, long story short, China no longer wants our recycling, and we got to figure out something else to do with it. So for the past almost 2 years, a lot of these big recycling facilities, these big sorting facilities that are holding those huge bales, that I was talking about, they've been stockpiling these, hoping that there will be some other market that comes up that they can sell them to. Unfortunately, a lot of these stockpiled recycled goods have been sent to landfill at this point. So this policy change from China has caused a lot of policy change for the United States. For example, here when I got to Greensboro, I wanted to know about our recycling program and what I can be recycling. There has been big policy change in Greensboro alone due to China. So I can no longer, here in Greensboro, recycle glass. They don't take glass anymore. They don't take cartons like milk cartons and OJ cartons and stuff like that. I can recycle cardboard, I can recycle plastic bottles and steel cans. So that's good. But if I'm putting glass and other things into the recycling that can't be recycled, then essentially I'm saying, oh, here you go, sorting facility, recyclers, just throw this away from me. Because that's essentially what they're gonna do anyways. We're just creating an extra step. So it really is important to look up your area, what kind of recycling is accepted, because chances are there's been some policy changes since China's policy change in your area, so that you don't contaminate and so you're not creating an extra step in the process. Now, speaking of contamination, things that you should know that you should never throw in the recycling are first, plastic bags. Pretend you have a plastic bag that's holding a lot of tin cans and you throw that in the recycling. That whole bag is probably gonna be chunked to landfill because you've just contaminated the whole process. Plastic bags get stuck in these millions of dollar machines that sort this stuff, and it doesn't make them very happy. It is actually very time intensive to remove the plastic baggies, to remove even things like cutlery. Anything smaller than a postcard, honestly, is probably gonna be sent to landfill because these things jam up the machines, they cause more harm than good, they contaminate. So make sure that you are not just being a wish cycler, but that you are throwing quality recycled products in there. And also that you're getting all the food off your recycling. That's also contamination. Pretend that you're throwing away a pizza box that has pizza grease all over it. They're gonna chunk that because grease cannot be removed from the paper. But if you take the top of the pizza box off, recycle that, compost or throw away the greasy pizza box, then you're actually doing them a huge favor and preventing that whole pizza box from going to landfill. Little tidbits that you should know. Other things that shouldn't be recycled: saran wrap, plastic baggies, and any like flimsy things that fruit come in, like those little cartons. Flimsy plastics like that are typically not recycled. Styrofoam. It is so painful, believe me, I know it's so painful when we chunk a huge thing of styrofoam into the trash. That's why I avoid styrofoam at all costs. Unfortunately, this also only contaminates the actual recycling. You cannot recycle styrofoam. Actually, you can, but it's way more intensive. There's very little market for it because it's very time and energy intensive. So it's not recycled, it's just thrown away. I know it's painful to throw it away, but at least you have peace of mind that you're not contaminating recycling that's good and actually can be recycled. That's the moral of that story. Now for the numbers on the bottom of the recycling. Just because there is a number in that little like three-sided triangle on the bottom of it doesn't mean that, oh, well, this can be recycled. Believe me, I thought that too. I only wish that was true. Honestly, these numbers are just the type of plastic it is, and doesn't necessarily mean that it can be recycled. So when you are choosing products, or even just deciding on what to throw in the recycling or not, avoid 3, 6, and 7, and prefer the plastics 1, 2, 4, and 5. Of course, at the end of the day, it's going to depend on your recycling facility and what they will accept, but at least that's a general rule of thumb when choosing products and deciding what's going to go in the recycling. So to recap, point number 1 is that we don't know if for sure if it's going to be recycled, not only because of the number, type of plastic, size of plastic, and whether your facility is going to accept it or send it to landfill, but also because China's policy changes have made it increasingly difficult for the United States to recycle their recyclables. Point number 2. Now, recycling should more probably accurately be called downcycling. And this is because, let's give an example. When you recycle a plastic bottle, chances are that plastic bottle isn't going to become a plastic bottle again. It's going to be downcycled. This is because plastic, paper, these things lose their integrity as they are made into new products. So your plastic bottle is probably not going to end up being a plastic bottle again. So common uses for downcycled plastic are going to be things like car parts, polyester fabric, fleece even, those fleeces that you buy, truck bed liners. So these kind of things, these are downcycled products. At the end of the day, a plastic can only be recycled, or I should say downcycled, a certain amount of times. And this is typically 2 to 3 times before eventually that whatever that end product is gonna be is gonna end up in the landfill. Another thing that plastic gets recycled or downcycled to are those little beads that are in like facial cosmetic things and even toothpaste and stuff like that. Those things do an infinite, at least in my opinion, do an infinite amount of damage because they end up in our waterways and ultimately in our oceans and our waters, and fish eat them, die, we then eat the fish, they're everywhere. So these little microbeads, we need to be careful not to purchase and buy these products with these little microbeads in them. And just another reason why we should reduce our plastic, not just recycle it, so we are not enabling them to make more microbeads. All to say, point number 2 is that the plastic or the paper that you are recycling is probably, it most likely is going to end up in landfill eventually at the end of its life. And that's sad. Or it could, like a lot of our trash, end up in our oceans. And honestly, that in and of itself is a really powerful third point as to why it is so important to reduce our plastic consumption. Because the less we use, the less we feed into this vicious cycle of using plastic, and the less likely we are that our plastics end up in our oceans, and they do tremendous damage not only to the wildlife and the ecology of the ocean, but then to us. With all that being said, I hope this video was insightful and educational. I know it's not the happiest video and the happiest topic to be talking about because it's like, oh, well, that's kind of a bummer. So I don't want anybody to feel discouraged on recycling or that, oh, well, might as well not even recycle because we don't know if it's going to be recycled. Don't do that. Don't be the naysayer. Just do some research in your area. It takes a quick Google search, see what your facility takes and how you can be helping them to streamline their process. And as always, remember the 4 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle, and adding on the 4th one is refuse. Don't forget the power of refusing plastic items so that we stop feeding into the system. So if you have any questions, you can ask them below. Certainly not the recycling guru. I'm just telling y'all what I know, what I've read, what I've learned in my journey, and I just hope it helps y'all. Of course, continue to follow me on Instagram, Root for Food, and subscribe to my email list, and you get exclusive recipes and DIY projects and herbalism stuff. I'll see y'all next time.